I have the Meander 1 pattern selected, and I also have the height set at 7.5, and I did that so that I can quilt 2 rows before I have to roll. I'm going to set up an edge-to-edge mode project. I will click the edge-to-edge icon. Now I'm going to follow all the instructions. Click upper left corner. Click the upper right corner. Click the lower right corner. Click the lower left corner. Creative Studio has established a boundary for this project. I'm going to fill in the length of the quilt, which is 96 inches. I'll place this in this box right here. 96. Okay, 96. Creative Studio has placed all the repeats and all the rows on the screen that I need to quilt this project. I have selected here connect start and end, and that's what I need. Down here it says select registration. I have end of set. Well, end of set will not work with this pattern because end of set, for it to work, the start and end must be down at the bottom of the pattern, and my start and end is at the top. I'm going to change that. I'm going to change it to place 2 pins. It has taken Creative Studio a while to work through this, but if you'll notice, I'm going to zoom in here. As on the left side, Creative Studio has placed this little marker. That is going to be the registration point on the left. Creative Studio has placed this on the right side of the quilt project. It's going to be the registration point for the right side. And if you'll notice, as you look at this, these marks are really at the start point and end point of the second row. Just in this particular pattern, that doesn't always hold true. I'm ready to quilt this. Notice that I've given the quilt project a name. Since I have it set up, I'm going to save it. All I need to do now is click the quilt icon and let the machine go to the start point of the first row. Creative Studio is going to the start point of the first row. It's taken a stitch. It tells me to pull up the bobbin thread and click OK. I have the bobbin thread pulled up. I click OK. Creative Studio is tying off and starting the first row. First row of quilting is complete. Now all I need to do is cut the bobbin thread and click OK. That way Creative Studio will take the machine and it will start the second row. I've cut the bobbin thread. I'm going to click OK. Creative Studio moved the machine to the start point of the second row. I'll click OK again. Ties the thread. We're now quilting the second row. You see the machine tells me exactly where it's following. The second row of quilting is finished. Now it says cut the bobbin thread and click OK. So I'm going to do that. Creative Studio comes up with the instructions. Click OK to move to the right registration point. I'm going to do that. The machine moved to the right registration point, and I took a piece of masking tape and I just took a ballpoint pen and placed a dot on it. I put that dot right under the needle. Now I'm going to click OK, so it'll go to the left registration point. I've taken a piece of masking tape with a dot, I've placed it underneath the needle. Now I'm going to click OK because I have both the left and the right registration points marked. Now I'm ready to roll the quilt. I've rolled the quilt, I'm all set. Now I'm going to click Continue and follow the directions. Click Continue. Creative Studio says click the left registration mark. So I put my needle over the left registration mark, click OK. Now it tells me to go and click the right registration mark. So I've done that. Creative Studio has shifted everything so that the pattern is inside of the boundary. The only problem that I have with this is the fact that on the right edge of this quilt it has changed slightly, and that's not an unusual happening, and it'll happen to you. So what I'm going to do now is simply select all. I'm going to use this arrow on the right, and I'm going to adjust this. As you could see, that didn't go well, but now I've used Control Z and everything is back where it's supposed to be. And I'm going to select all. I'm using the crosshair to show me where the edge of the quilt is. Also, I want you to notice that again Creative Studio has marked this point. That point is on the right side, then a point on the left side. This will indicate the point where the next two registration points are going to be located. Everything looks good, and it looks like I'm ready to quilt the next quilting area. I can quilt 2 rows, remember. When you quilt these next 2 rows, when you get to the end of the second row, pull up the bobbin thread, cut the bobbin thread, click OK. Creative Studio is going to move to this point so you can mark it, and after you mark it and click OK, it's going to move to this point and so you can mark that. And this routine just goes over and over until you get to the end of the quilt. Next I'm going to click the quilt icon, and Creative Studio is going to move to the start point of this third row. Pull up the bobbin thread and click OK, and it will start to quilt the row. Okay, since I'm not an edge-to-edge mode person, and I really don't like the edge-to-edge mode, I did click quilt and I let the machine go to the start point of the third row. I pulled up the bobbin thread, but I clicked stop. And it says, you have not finished quilting all the pattern in this band. Are you sure you want to stop? I'm going to click yes. Now, you say, well, what are you going to do? The machine is sitting at the start point of this third row. I have zoomed in so that you can see. I'm going to right click, and I can get a drop down menu. I'm going to go down and select relocate, shift all to one point. Creative Studio comes up with this. Using relocate all converts this quilt group from edge to edge to repeat patterns. Do you wish to finish your edge to edge using relocate instead of edge to edge continue, press yes or no. I'm going to press yes. And it says click on the known point. I'm going to turn on the end snap. And notice it snapped right to the end of the start point of the first repeat in the third row of quilting. I'm going to click on that. Now it says click yes when the machine head is at the same point on the quilt, no to cancel. I already have the machine sitting there because that's where Creative Studio took the machine to take the stitch. Click yes. Notice right here, repeat patterns edge to edge. I'm going to finish this quilt in repeat patterns edge to edge. I no longer need this boundary, so I'm going to remove it. I've checked to make sure I have plenty of bobbin for the next row. Now I'm just going to simply click quilt. Creative Studio moved right to that point where the next row should start. That's tying off. I'll just cut my bobbin thread and let it quilt the next row. After leaving the edge to edge mode and being in the repeat patterns edge to edge, I quilted the next two rows, row 3 and 4, and at the end of row 4 I pulled up the bobbin thread, I cut the bobbin thread, then I clicked OK. The machine went to the left side at the start point of the 5th row and took a stitch. I hit stop, then I hit stop again, and I marked that point. I marked it with the thread from when I pulled up the bobbin thread. I pulled it up, I wrapped that thread around a pin, and then I cut the thread underneath. Now that's my marker where I'm going to set up my next quilting area. Next thing I need to do is roll this quilt. I have the needle at the point where Creative Studio marked the start point of this 5th row. It doesn't look like that on the screen. It looks like it's 2 rows up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click. I'm going to go down and select relocate. This time I'm going to use project origin, or I can use shift alt to one point, either one. If I just use relocate project origin, it says this will align all the patterns and all this stuff. Now click yes. Notice the crosshair indicates that the patterns have all been shifted to the point where I have placed the needle, and that was at the start point of this 5th row. So it's ready to quilt. What I'll do is I'll quilt row 5 and row 6. When it gets to the end of row 6 and ties off at this right side, I'll just pull up the bobbin thread, and then I'll bring the machine. I always just bring the machine back down to the left edge of the quilt, and then I'll click OK, and it'll go right to the start point of this row, take a stitch, I'll mark it, and I'll continue that until I get to the end of the quilt. That is how easy it is to do edge to edge quilting in repeat patterns. I will shut my machine down for the day, and when I come back, when I start the machine up, what I'll simply do is I'll place the needle right here where this thread marked this point, and I'll right click and I'll select relocate, the project origin, and Creative Studio will set this project to where it'll start quilting right at the start point of this row. Doesn't matter how long I take to start this project back up again, I can always use relocate, find my start point, and continue quilting in repeat patterns edge to edge.